I'm going to turn this over to Brian Henshaw, our Finance Director.
All right. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Council. Brian Henshaw, Finance. I just want to start by saying that these are three ordinances that are all related. They're kind of housekeeping ordinances that we do each year. But the first one is to adjust the beginning, reconcile beginning estimated reserves to actual beginning reserves. During the budget cycle, each department estimates how much of each project will be completed by the end of the year. After the year-end close, we process and pay all the invoices that have been received at the cutoff, and then we reconcile those with the remaining project budgets and bring them forth as a reconciling ordinance to the beginning reserves. One small correction, it's $45 million, not $45,000. The numbers are fairly large. A lot of this is capital projects, so we do carry forward a lot of the capital projects from one year into the next. As we just heard about how long the Paddon Creek daylighting project can go on. So some of that money has been budgeted, some of it will be in next year's budget, but we bring that forward each year. The easiest one to look at is probably on page 19 of your packet. This shows the details of each fund reserve balance, and I'll just walk you through the very front top line for the general fund unassigned. We estimated the beginning reserves to be $4.3 million. This reconciling ordinance will add $2.7 million to it. So the actual beginning reserve numbers is the third column, $6.9 million. And then we also adjust the ending reserves because the beginning reserves go up and also the ending reserves will go up. And then we've approved some of the reappropriation requests, which are the next two ordinances. And so the estimated ending reserve for the general fund unassigned fund balance is $5.9 million. So that's how they walk through. And the total there at the bottom of that page is $122 million for the entire city. Any questions on just that one ordinance first? I'd like to walk through all three, and then we will need to vote on each one individually. So any questions on that, Michael?
I actually have kind of a more general question that does apply, well, more to this than some of the others. So as you say, this is a bookkeeping thing. There's an arbitrary calendar cutoff, and we have to adjust around that. But also sometimes costs can have to move in the next year because there was an actual delay or an actual surprise or an actual change in how quickly something might be accomplished. To your knowledge, were any of these rollovers due to any significant surprises or delays in a project, or are they really just, something that's resolved within a month?
So I think you're kind of leading into the next portions, the next two ordinances of encumbered and then unencumbered, but you're right on. That's what adjusts the beginning and ending reserves is. So if I had a contract for $100,000, I only got $50,000 of it done. That means that I have $50,000 of encumbered contracts. So that is going to adjust the reserves because I didn't get it spent. So that'll be
right. And my question is that $50,000 just because the bill comes in next month, or are there some of these? This could be an opportunity to show some delays in our timelines.
Yeah, all of the above.
All of the above.
All of the above. Yeah. So. And makes up the detailed sheets that I sent out to you has all of the projects and all the line details of all the projects, and so they're all in various stages. Capital ones, there's permitting, fish windows, all of that adds to the time that it takes to do the project. The other ones are just delivery schedules. If you order 5 chairs and only 2 of them can be delivered, then that leaves 3 chairs that have to be delivered in the next year.
So you say more detailed. Do you mean what's in the packet or something else?
That was sent out late last week.
Oh, I think I haven't read it then.
Okay.
Is it okay with the committee if Brian proceeds with all three and then we circle back to vote? Okay, please continue on. Thank you, Brian.
So on page 20 of your packet is encumbered items. As Michael was saying, these items were under contract or purchased in last year, but for various reasons, either the project delayed or they couldn't successfully get all of the goods delivered. They're still encumbered, meaning we have a contract for them, but they were not complete at the end of the year. So of this, we're asking for reappropriation of encumbered items of $11.7 million. Most of this is for capital goods. 7.5 of this is for capital goods. The remaining 4.1 is for operational goods. This number is approximately what we did last year. It's up. It's down slightly from last year where we had $14 million of encumbered goods. So any questions? And so I guess I'll go into the plan. I sent out a large spreadsheet, I think it was Friday afternoon, so if you haven't had a chance to review it yet, that's fine. We can answer some questions today, but my preference would be is that you review that information. It has encumbered and unencumbered goods, project detail. If you have specific projects or questions, email me, and I'll facilitate all of the department discussion to go along with that. And I had a summary sheet that shows just, by department and by fund, so you can look at it and compare it to the prior year.
Any questions?
Just have a general policy or philosophical question in terms of unencumbered dollars, perhaps. If there's an overage due to an underestimation from the previous year and there are extra dollars, what happens to those funds?
At the end of the project, if there's any remaining funds, they'll go to the bottom line in that fund, so they'll impact the reserves. So that'll be determined at the end of the project. Hopefully that'll be the case on some of them.
For dollars that are maybe not attached to a project, has it been in the past where those funds were ever transferred to another priority within the budget?
So, yes, but you have a good question. These are all approved items. We're not reallocating any dollars at this time. So we won't know that until the projects are complete, and it would happen through the budget process. So we'll be coming back, because it's a biennial budget, we'll come back in September, October timeframe for new projects that council and the mayor would like to try to introduce into the budget. But right now it's not the time to add new programs or projects, because it's really mid-project. We don't know how the projects are going to end up. It's the best estimate that we have today, with a lot of unknowns as they go forward. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brian.
All right. So the third ordinance.
So
sorry, Mayor.
Brian actually answered that very well. Because we have a biennial budget this year, the new decisions about new investments, whether they're from what was saved from the budget in the past, or deciding to add something that wasn't included in the budget amount for the biennium, will happen hopefully during the supplemental budget period. So now we have a 2-year budget, and then because of the biennial budgeting change, we have a supplemental budget that we'll be doing in September. And there'll be an opportunity to do those things that you were just describing. But this is kind of like the rollover. This is that we just made decisions on a biennial budget, and so this is just moving things forward to meet, I think, auditors' requirements.
Yeah, so it brings forward the budget authority into the coming year so that we can actually have those expenses go out. But it also is regulated by, it has to be prior approved. We're not adding things, during the year or anything like that. These are things that the 2014 budget already had in them. And then it's also regulated. We can't add to the budget. So if that one project where I said it was $100,000 and now the department says, oh, I can't really do it for $100,000, I need $120,000, we can't give them more budget authority either on the project budget or by department or by fund. So there's many criteria that are used to determine how much finally gets approved. There's a reappropriation request, and then there's actually the amount that we can bring forward as approved budget. So it's not a time to add to the budget or change the budget, but just to bring forward so that we can complete the projects that are in process. So.
Go ahead.
I don't mean to belabor the point, but I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that the Community Development Advisory Board had a number of proposals that came back, as you all know, and many were funded due to the increase in funding for that program, but several were not. And so then these are prevention and intervention programs. This is part of this bigger picture that we're talking about with some other items that are coming before us. And so I'm wondering, is it possible then in this scenario to shift a modest amount of funding to those programs for seniors and children and so forth, or is that just not possible within this structure here?
This wouldn't be the proper format to do that, because these are just projects that were approved in the budget. I can tell you that we've maxed out. We actually reduced budgets. We reduced the request, the authorized amount, because we also, all those criteria I just mentioned, they also have to leave enough ending reserve balance in the funds, and we can't spend below those reserve balance. So all four of those criteria go into bringing forward these requests to the council. Those would need to be presented to the mayor and then brought back to council as additional requests during the year, and it needs to be looked at as far as what the city can afford and the prioritization of all of the requests that you're doing, which again is more appropriate at September, October in this year for the biennial budget.
Just to add on to that, when we make the budget adjustments in the supplemental, which will be in the fall, when we go through our regular budgeting cycle, which will be very abbreviated this year because we've already made a 2-year commitment to funding, I think it would be prudent for the council to know everything that potentially may be on the table. I think we have a very... we've tried very hard to fund those programs, Dan, that you're talking about. And I think we've done a fairly decent job, but there's always more requests than what we can fund. And I had a chance to look at the list last week, and it is disappointing, some of the things that, didn't make the cut, even though we reduced some of the grants so that we could go down the list at least 2 or 3 more projects to bring forward to you. But I think actually to keep us in a strategic budgeting mode, I think it would be better to talk about those things in September rather than now. Having said that, and now Brian will say, that's enough. It is always the council's prerogative to add things to the budget through amendment. So there's nothing that prohibits you from looking at that. It probably isn't the most systematic way to look at the budget and to make sure that we're making long-term commitments, because every time we kind of fund something where we don't really have the bow wave capacity as we go forward, we're making someone a very short promise. And for the social service activities, I believe there should be long promises, and so people can count on it.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
All right. So the third ordinance today is on page 42 of the packet. This is for unencumbered goods, largely due to capital projects, as we've been discussing. But these are goods or projects that were in last year's budget, but not yet under a contract. So we don't have a purchase order, or a contract, or an interlocal agreement yet. These requests are now being brought forward as amendments to the 2015 adopted budget. So it brings forward the spending authority that we issued last year, but it adds to the 2015 spending authority. $50.8 million of this, the $53 million is for capital projects. This is up about $800,000 from last year, so it is a normal year. The good news is we have slightly more of grants and contribution revenue coming in that offsets part of this. So the overall net increase to the budget is the $36 million. Which will take the total citywide budget from $238.8 million to over $275 million. So we do have a very large spending plan. There's always things that people are trying to add to that or would like to get added to it, but we need to work through some of the backlog and work through some of these things as we go forward. So are there questions regarding either the information that I emailed to you or from today? And then I would like to take those, most of your questions in written format, and then we'll bring those back to you or respond before third and final on May 4th. But we can answer some questions today. I know Parks and Public Works is here if you had specific questions.
Brian, the fourth item, are we going to do that one separately?
That one's separate, yeah.
Okay, all right. So let's go back to our very first ordinance. Oh, do we have any questions from Council? Go ahead.
I would just like to move approval of the first of the ordinances, an ordinance adjusting the estimated 2015 budgeting beginning reserves.
We have a motion in front of us. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We have a recommendation of 3-0 for tonight's committee meeting, and that was for bill number 20801. Michael?
I'll move that we recommend approval of the second ordinance, an ordinance authorizing $11 million in reappropriations for goods and services ordered in 2014 but unpaid.
Motion in front of us. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 0. Motion carries 3-0 for recommendation for this evening. Michael?
And I'll recommend, again, that we recommend approval. I will move that we recommend approval tonight of the third ordinance, an ordinance to authorize $53 million of reappropriations for goods and services budgeted in 2014 but unencumbered.
Thank you. Motion in front of us. All in favor? Say aye. Aye. Opposed? Our recommendation is 3-0 for tonight's committee meeting. And we're going to move to our fourth item. Brian, do you want to talk about bill number 20804?
I think actually Ted's going to do that one.
Oh, Ted's going to do that.
Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you, Brian.
Good afternoon, Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. In the 2014 budget, Council approved a new full-time position in the Natural Resources Division of Public Works, an environmental monitoring coordinator position. And we've been going through the process to try to fill that position. The intent was that position would take on several duties, including the ongoing monitoring of all of the wetland mitigation projects that the city does associated with capital projects where we may have to impact a wetland, do some wetland restorations at another site, and then through the permitting process, you monitor that mitigation improvement for 10 years or whatever the permitting requirement is. And we typically contract that work out. We never had the staff on hand to go out and monitor and make sure that our wetland projects were actually successful in meeting all of the intended uses or intended outcomes. That was one component. Another component of this project or position was to move forward with developing a regional wetland mitigation program where we could maximize those wetland mitigation opportunities to make sure that perhaps rather than doing some enhancement on a localized area, we're making sure that the enhancements are in the place that provides the most ecological lift and the best, most appropriate place for the overall environment in the city. And lastly, that position was going to do some water quality monitoring of our stormwater positions, our stormwater facilities, and monitoring of the water quality associated with habitat projects. What we found was that was a very big list. It required a very broad skill set and a broad background, and we just went through the hiring process and couldn't quite find anyone that could do all of that work and do it efficiently. And what the hiring team decided to do was pursue breaking the position into two part-time positions and focusing those positions on half of the job, essentially, where we could find someone that could meet all the requirements in a more efficient way. And that's what this agenda before the council does. I would like to say that there was an error in the process, and you should have had a budget ordinance in your packet. That didn't happen, and so you can't take any action today on this. But what I was hoping to do was represent what we'd like to do, and if council is supportive of it, we would come back at your next meeting, perhaps just put it on as a consent agenda item and go through the formal approval process that way. And that was something that Peter recommended as maybe the most efficient way to handle it. I would also like to say that this recommendation is doing everything within our already approved budget amount. So we're not requesting additional budget authority. What the request is to create two part-time positions, which takes council action and takes a budget ordinance to actually create the position authority. The dollars are already there. What we're going to be doing is taking the money from that already approved full-time position, adding to it a little bit of money that we use typically for part-time employees, what we call regular non-benefited employees, and adding that together to fund these two part-time positions. They would be so in essence, we're asking for authority for another 0.25 FTE is what it amounts to. Again, the reason for doing this is because the position was just a little bit too broad to fill effectively, and our strategy is to break it into two part-time positions. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, and again, if council is supportive, I'll put an agenda bill forward for your next meeting in consent agenda with the appropriate budget ordinance.
Questions from committee?
Do we need to have a motion to move to have that budget ordinance as a consent agenda item at our next regular meeting?
Do we, Peter?
Yeah, I think it would be good that way they have an assurance that it's at least moving in the direction of approval.
Okay. I'm going to move to have this budget ordinance pursuant to this bill number 20804 as a consent agenda item at our next regular meeting.
And my understanding of your motion is that the committee does recommend approval tonight of the idea, and then also the budget amendment part you're talking about, the consent agenda part.
My understanding is that we can't take
You
action.
can't even do that?
I think that's accurate. Yeah, I think it's just saying we're supportive, put it on the consent agenda next time, and then you can
Okay,
take
then
formal
I
action.
misunderstand?
That's my motion.
It is a recommendation, though, but all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oh, sorry, Roxanne?
I just have a general question, not affecting the vote there at all. Would this eventually, with wetland mitigation, community members have expressed an interest in whether we could do a wetland mitigation bank, and would that be a future for this?
Yeah, it's definitely in that line. The city went through a process where we looked at a more comprehensive way to deal with wetland mitigation. We looked at both the bank option and also an in lieu fee program. The recommendation at that time was to move forward with an in lieu fee program where folks that were both private and public, so city projects, but also developer-driven projects in the city, if there were impacts to wetlands, they could work with the city and make a financial contribution to the city. So the program would identify, similar to a bank, but rather than having the work already completed, like is the case with a bank where all the mitigation's already done, all the work's done, and now you're just buying into it, we would take the money, the city would take the money, and then identify the appropriate projects that were already approved by the council, saying that these are the most appropriate mitigation projects. We would take the developer's contribution, perhaps Parks or Public Works also paying into the program, and then go do the work after the fact. Both programs take approval through the Department of Ecology, and it's a lengthy process to get your program approved. We think probably 3 to 5 years, and this position would be the lead on that, working in Renee LaCroix's group under her guidance to get that done.
Okay. So follow up that, so the committee recommends that Public Works amend the natural resource budget for the addition of a 0.25 FTE for the environmental monitoring coordinator position. And we cannot move, but we can recommend that this be sent to consent agenda.
Thank you.
And that's end of committee, and we'll take a 2-minute break. We did. It was 3-0. Sorry, I apologize. We kind of did that little backward motion, but we're 3-0 for recommendation.